Right, so just quickly, at least I hope reasonably quickly, I want to do a quick rave about one of my all-time favourite classic science fiction authors, Roger Zelazny, and what for many, many years was my favourite book by him. It wasn't the first. The first was Jack of Shadows, which I love and still own. You can't see my Roger Zelazny shelf, it's a little bit further up there. Still love Jack of Shadows. Reread it annually at least for several years. Discovered Nine Princes in Amber. Loved all of them. Read every Zelazny I could get. But for many, many years, Roadmarks was the book I adored and reread until it was part of my psyche. I think that after Zelazny published A Night in the Lonesome October, maybe that eclipsed this one, but I've still read this one more often because I read it for the first time back in goodness knows, young teen and Deb. Anyway, it's a really clever, diverse book. The key theme to it really is that there's a novel that... The key novel theme to this novel is that there's a road and it travels from the beginning of time all the way to the end of time. And throughout the road, there's exits. On the book, you'll see, and the cover, it features The Last Exit to Babylon, which was apparently the working title of the manuscript when Zelazny was writing it. Anywhere in time, you can go. But there is the chance of you changing history when you are in a time. And if you do that, sometimes the exit to that particular time and place becomes weedy and overgrown until people can no longer find it. It is such an exciting concept. I played with this and played with this and played with this. So just imagine if you went back in time and you wanted to change the entire history of Australia. You could go back to when James Cook was 3 years old, smuggle a pistol in, shoot him in the head. No James Cook discovering Australia. How different would it be? Well, you can do anything with that, can't you? So this was a book that gave me hours and hours of pleasant speculation and hypothesis. Anyway, there's a handful, well, hundreds of them really, but in terms of time and place, a handful of people who can travel the road, whether it's because they're personally gifted or whatever. And we start the book with one character, Red Dorikeen. Red Dorikeen's been travelling the road for decades, at least as long as he remembers. There's no notion of him ever being anywhere else, really. He has a pickup truck and he has a sentient microarray computer, which is disguised as a book, as his only companion. Now, in our introduction to this book, we learn a certain amount about the road just through the way it's told. As with any road, there are highway cops, and they pull Red Dorikeen over. They uncover his trailer, and they find that he's once again, because this apparently his primary hobby at the moment, he's trying to smuggle guns to the Greeks at Marathon so they can win the Battle of Marathon. The cop remonstrates with Red, telling him he's got no idea the damage he could do, and Red said that's basically nonsense. People have been doing this throughout time and space, and he's just trying to recreate a past which he remembers as having once existed, where the Greeks did win Marathon. I was a terribly ignorant little tucker. I had no idea what the Battle of Marathon is, and I had no idea who won it. Didn't really matter. Now, the way the book is structured, you really have two very non-linear parts of the story, and they're titled 2 and 1. So I got a really good quote from Zelazny from Wikipedia. I did not decide until I was well into the book that since there was really two timeline situations being dealt with, on-road and off-road, with off-road being any when, not where, in history, I needed only 2 chapter headings 1 and 2 to let the reader know where we were. And since the 2s were non-linear anyway, I clipped each 2 chapter into a discrete packet, stacked them, shuffled them before reinserting them between the 1s any which way. Apparently the publisher didn't like that. He was required to make some changes. So Red Dorikeen is always the 1s, I believe. No, yes, Red Darkin is always one, but the two can be many things. Early on we discover that Red Darkin is subject to an assassination attack, which is called, I think it's a Black Decade, in which if it's lodged through the correct road authorities, a person can get 10 shots at an individual for free and without repercussion. The person who's being targeted can do anything to escape them, but he can't seek help from authorities. So Red Darkin's being targeted by this Black Decade, and part of our one vignettes are where we encounter all different assassins that are being hired in order to come and get them, and they're from any time and space, and one of them's a future Earth, probably Earth, post-apocalyptic, where an intelligence has been inserted into a war machine. That's just one. One comes from far in the past, and he's a monk who's been trained in assassination. It's quite fascinating. Now, of course, anything you can imagine having happened to Earth has happened at some point or another. So you've got places where aliens have visited, and you've got places where aliens have stayed. You've got a huge variety of options, and you can go in as far into the future as you can imagine, and all the way back into the past where the dinosaurs still roam the Earth, and that is a plot feature of the book. Now, having met Red, we also then meet a woman he meets on the road called Layla. She appears to be the same kind as Red, and they've got a long shared history. But Zelazny never over-explains. He doesn't do that in most books. He doesn't do it at all here. You're just carried along with the story, or you're not. Now then we go to one of the chapters that aren't Red Darkin, and we start with a modern-day young American man named Randy, where modern day, when was this published? Copyright 1979, so we're probably looking at a 60s or 70s modern-day man. He's just finished college. He's split up with his girlfriend. He's at a hiatus. He's not sure what to do with himself. And he decides maybe now is the time when he will go searching for his father, he never knew his father. His father vanished before his mother was known to be pregnant. He's grown up without his father. There's a curiosity. His mother can't tell him a whole lot about her. All he has of his father is a book called Leaves of Grass, which he picks up and starts to leaf through at random. Now, pause. We have got two sentient microarray computers. One is Leaves of Grass, which apparently is based on a real book. I didn't know this. When I read them, I just thought they were invented book. Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman is the basis of the cybernetic array that is left behind on our Earth for Randy to find. And Les Fleurs du Mal by Charles Baudelaire is the microwave that's currently travelling with Red Darkin. They are referred to as flowers and leaves respectively. They are entirely self-aware and self-conscious individuals. They have human-like levels of intelligence, and Leaves is incredibly offended at one point when Randy refers to her as a computer. Her, him, it. To Leaves as a computer. So, where have we got to? Oh yes, Randy finds Leaves on the bookshelf and starts leafing through. It's a collection of poetry, I gather. I've never actually found either of those books. And notices that there's bits underlined. He reads the underlined book pieces in sequence, and that activates Leaves. Leaves tells him about Road Darkin, who they decide is probably Randy's father. They hop in a truck, and Leaves takes Randy to the road. So Leaves and Randy start travelling the road looking for Red. If you wonder how he gets fuel, well, there's fuel stops along the way as well as rest stops, and Red hasn't disconnected Leaves from his account, so there's money there for Randy to purchase fuel. And then he bumps into Leela, who Red Darkin had earlier dumped. She's a bit pissed at that. She wants to find him. She's worried about him. She thinks this Black Decade may succeed. She wants to help. So basically you've got these three who are interesting characters travelling the road looking for Red. You've got Red travelling the road, trying not to be killed by all the assassins. You've got a lot happening there, and you keep popping into these little dissociated bits, one of whom is the Marquis de Sade. They're described as vignettes. Is it vignettes or vignettes? I've never been sure which one it is. Vignette, spelled with a G, but it's probably French. Vignette, whatever. Vignette always makes me think of salad. Maybe I shouldn't have skipped lunch. Anyway. So there is no part of Roadmarks that isn't actually fun. It's thoroughly enjoyable, and the skipping around doesn't make it any less so, because every single character is unique, individual, and fascinating. There's more interesting concepts crammed in here than any other author would have been able to manage in 185 pages. The ending is thoroughly satisfying in a completely non-ending and non-final way. It leaves the world open to all the adventures and experiences you can imagine. Red survives his Black Decade. We find out an awful lot more about that dragon on the cover that's stalking the pickup track, and we find out an awful lot more about other creatures and beings along the road. I don't know what to say. I have encountered so few people who've actually read this. I mean, Zelazny was a major author. I'm sure many people have read it. I know it was reviewed many, many times. I'd love to have had an opportunity to discuss it with someone else who read and loved it. There's so much in this that even though I've been reading it off and on for years and years, every time you read it, something new spikes out at you. And Zelazny was one of those people whose turns of phrases are, without in any way being pretentious, quite beautiful. You've got a lot of authors who are very pretentious in their beauty, such as, I suspect, the two poetry collections which Zelazny references here, Flowers and Leaves. But Zelazny's turns of phrases are not pretentious, and they're not ostentatious. You don't have to sit back and go, wow, wasn't that a beautiful literary moment? You just get sucked up in the story, driving down the road with it. So, for those of you out there who know more history than I did when I was a teenager, you probably realise that the Greeks did win the Battle of Marathon. I've Googled it since then. There wasn't Google when I was a teenager. And when Randy and Rod finally do meet, the interesting thing is Red accepts him as his son. He doesn't really remember the event. He's got weird memory, and that's part of the plot, so I'm not going to in any way disclose it. But he says, oh, okay, quite interested to meet him. Happy enough with the whole situation. They've dealt with the Black Decade, and he says, well, come on, let's go start trying to arrange the Greeks winning the Battle of Marathon. And Randy says, but the Greeks did win the Battle of Marathon. And Red goes, oh, really? And off they go into the rest of their story. That was a total spoiler. I don't think you can spoil a book that's this old, though. And I could go on talking about this for an hour, spoiler every major plot event, and it wouldn't make it any less enjoyable to read. This is a thoroughly enjoyable book. And anyone who likes classic science fiction, or who has ever enjoyed a Roger Zelazny, or enjoys any form of speculative fiction, I think there's something here for all of you. I'd love to hear what other people thought about this book. I'm sure I'm not the only one who read it. Oh yes, so comment about whatever you thought about this book when you read it, or go away and read the book and come back and then comment. I'm sure we'll have something. The only criticism I can really have to this book is because it does split between the twos and the ones very randomly. I may not have enjoyed it quite as much if I'd encountered it today. As a mature adult with a more sophisticated, perhaps, reading background than I had as a teenager, I might have found the inconsistent, non-linear jumping around, a little bit awkward. Red Darkeen is described as in a linear way, but he hasn't had a non-linear existence on the road for so long that even that linearity is really absent. I'm not sure I'd have loved it as much today as I did then, but as a teenager, I absolutely adored it. So, yes, I'll stop now.